Welcome to episode 87 of How About Them Huskies. As always, I'm your host, Connor, joined by Matt and Andrew. And today kicks off a 2 week span where we're going to try to provide a lot of content for you guys, a lot of season previews. And we're kicking it off here on How About Them Huskies with the preview of the UConn guards this year. There's four guys we're going to be talking about today: Solo Ball, Aiden Mahaney, Hassan, Diarra, Noel. We're going to break it down, the position group, maybe who's going to start, come off the bench. We got a glimpse of that in that game against Rhode Island. We'll discuss it a little further, but before we really hop into it, what are your guys' initial thoughts about this backcourt group? Because it may not be, it's only four deep. It may not be the deepest backcourt we've had, but I feel like the talent's really there.
At first look, it's a little easy to look at it and think it might be a little bit underwhelming just because of all the talent that we've had come through with Castle and Newton and etc., Cam Spencer. But this is a very talented group, and we're going to see that as the season continues. Hurley's going to get the best out of these guys, and I'm really excited, honestly, for what I think they can put out on the court.
I agree. It's gonna be interesting to watch. We have two returners, one guy who's been here for 2 seasons, and then a freshman that didn't play a ton last year. He started obviously because of Castle, but then ultimately ended up falling out of the rotation once Castle became a lottery pick. And then we got two new guys, a freshman and a transfer in Noel and Mahaney. So I think that Hurley's going to have a really tough choice on how to play these guys, but I think these guys will all contribute to this year's team a ton.
Yeah, we'll start with the guy that's been here the longest, Hassan Diarra, the reigning Big East Sixth Man of the Year for the Huskies. He was in the starting lineup for that game against URI, the exhibition game last week. I imagine he will be the starting point guard for this team, at least off rip. We've seen times where we've had to make lineup changes if things don't work, but I said this in the recap of that episode. Hassan Diarra has earned his starting spot after coming off the bench for the past 2 years, winning two titles. I feel like there's a lot of talent. I feel you could argue any of these four guys could start, honestly, even the freshman Noel, but Diarra being experienced, being the veteran, I'm fine with him starting. And defensively, I feel like he's the anchor of this team. He disrupts all the lead scorers on the other teams. He's done that for the past couple of years. So being an anchor on defense, being a veteran leader, I'm fine with Diarra in the starting lineup.
I definitely agree with that take there that Diarra has earned his spot in the starting lineup, but I do also agree that rotations can change. And I feel like that probably will happen. I think Diarra will start, but he's a natural six man. I mean, it's not science that he's your six man. He wins Big East six man of the year and two national championships. So I feel like just having him in that role, knowing that you have a solidified backup point guard to come in and clean up messes when you need. I feel like you shouldn't really mess with that, and I feel like you should kind of keep that momentum.
And that's what I've been saying is that I feel like obviously he's earned his spot in the starting lineup, being here for 2 years, a back-to-back national champion, and a huge piece of both of those. But I still agree with Matt. I mean, I don't know why you change it after having success there for both. Obviously, you still had Newton those years, but either way, bring in Solo Ball in there. See what he can do. And if he can't play the point guard position right out of the gate, then Hassan Diarra can. So I don't think there's really any reason to start Diarra right now because you can if Solo can't really play the point guard position.
Yeah, looking at Haas's box, not his box score, like his sports reference page, the past 3 years where he's played a bunch, one at Texas A&M and the past two here, he's played 116 games with seven starts. So he's made some spot starts. Like last year, I believe his one start was that St. John's game at the Garden when Caravan was out when we won a smaller lineup. I'm pretty sure that's right. But he's new to starting. Obviously, he's been around. He's played 134 games. It's not gonna be like foreign to him. It's still basketball. He's still gonna be playing a majority of the game. But yeah, I just feel like I could see where you guys are coming from saying why if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we don't have the luxury of having a Newton or Castle like last year or the year before having an Andre Jackson. We need a true distributor out there. And in that game against URI, Diarra had 9 assists in his 20 minutes. He was really, you could tell the chemistry was really high because he's been around all these guys like Sampson for a few years. So yeah, I just feel like having that chemistry is important. Maybe it'll be a slow start for these new guys like Mahaney or Noel chemistry wise. Just having that off the gate with DR is huge.
I do feel like we have an All-American type point guard on the team, but we're gonna get to him in a minute.
We're gonna get to him in a minute. We're gonna not get to him Now we're gonna go to the guy who maybe in the future could be an All-American point guard. But I feel like the only other true point guard, Diarra is a true point guard. This other guy, Noel, I feel like is a true point guard. He almost has to be. He's 6 feet tall, a small guy. But I was really impressed by his shooting in that game against URI. Obviously, he only took two threes, but he knocked down both of them, and he's an explosive player, speedy. I don't know how much he'll play this year, just to be honest. He probably deserves to play. He should play, but he didn't crack the first half rotation in that game against Rhodey. That was Jaden Ross getting a majority of the minutes we thought that Noel would get, but he may force himself into the rotation, especially you only have four guards on the roster, especially if there's an injury or something. He's going to play some big minutes. So even if it's not right away, I feel like Noel is going to be very impactful on the team this year.
I agree, and I feel like at the start of the season, he's going to be more of a spot guy, a guy who you put in when you need a little bit of a spark off a bench, maybe like a Joey Calcaterra from a few years ago. He'll have his breakout games where he puts up 10 or 15 points, maybe hit like two or three three-pointers, but to start the year, he's definitely going to take more of a conservative bench role, but I would be surprised if we didn't see any of him throughout the start of the season. He definitely deserves, at least like 5 minutes, 10 minutes a game just to go out there and show what he's made of. Really, really good competitor.
And it's hard to talk about freshmen, especially after just seeing them in one scrimmage, I'll call it, and then just watching their high school stats. But the way he looked in high school, he looks like he's going to be a Big East point guard, like a Khalid Alameen or a Kemba Walker. Like he is built to be a Big East point guard. Like Matt said, very few freshmen just walk into this program and play off the bat. Obviously, we said this a million times. Castle's the exception, and Caravan, but even Clayne waited his turn. But he is going to be a very, very Big East point guard. I'd be shocked if he went and played anywhere else besides this program. And I think that I agree with Matt that he's going to be a conservative bench guy at the beginning of the season. But I think that as the season goes on, he'll get his time, obviously, in those non-con games. But I think he's going to earn his spot eventually, and he's going to be a big piece for us come March.
Yeah, and he kind of reminds me a little bit of like a freshman solo ball, just his physicality. I pulled up his 24/7 sports page just to have some stuff to talk about him. And this high school scouting report, first line, he's a power guard with a bulldog mentality. That's a different look than a Hassan Diarra. Even if it's just for, like you said, Matt, 5 or 10 minutes in a game, just giving the defense of the other team a different look. A guy that can also score his own buckets. We saw him make those two threes. I just feel like he may not be the guy we think he was going to be, at least going into this season. A lot of people I saw had him, a lot of people had him in their starting lineups before the season started, but I feel like he's going to be very impactful and maybe a sneaky like X factor of this team off the bench down the stretch.
And he's certainly not a one and done. Hurley sees him not as a project, but as a, you know, long-term player, maybe 2 or 3 seasons with Noel. So I feel like if you're not playing him at least a little bit this year, it's kind of a waste of a year. Obviously, he's getting the practices in, but you want him to see Big East gameplay just so that, next year when you might need a starting point guard or in 2 years when he's for sure going to be your starting point guard, that he's ready and he's able to go out there and compete every night.
Yeah, last thing on Noel, we haven't really brought in a smaller point guard in a few years. The last one that comes to mind is Rasul Diggins, and that did not work out. But I feel like this is certainly a different scenario. I don't know why that just came to mind. It's just because we had Castle, obviously. He's a point guard, but he's also 6'5", 6'6", not really your typical Noel size. But yeah, I'm talking in circles, I feel like here. I'm just gonna end it here. I feel like Noel's going to be impactful for the Huskies in the 2024-25 season, but it may not be in significant minutes. Moving on, we did the two true point guards. Now we're going to move on to the guys who can handle the ball, but I feel like they're more fit off the ball. And I feel like this guy surprised us in that game against Rhode Island. I realized saying that could be either of the two guys we haven't mentioned yet because they both performed very well. But the one I'm talking about is Mr. Solo Ball. 18 points in that game, explosive scoring, hit some threes, grab some big rebounds. He's a guy. I want to hear what you guys have to say before I have to say, because I have a really, really weird thing to say. I just want to know what you guys have to say.
With solo ball, you can definitely see the talent, and it's apparent what he brings to the table. But last year, obviously, pretty inefficient, pretty all over the place. Just last season, he averaged 3 points a game, which is a little bit underwhelming. But this year, he's seemed to have taken that jump least from what Hurley makes it sound like, and from what we saw in the scrimmage, he's going to be one of our top scorers. You need him here, and I feel like Hurley will make great use of solo ball because we've seen in the past point guards come in who aren't true point guards, a la Tristan Newton, and he makes it work. He makes these players valuable. And Newton got drafted, and he had a very successful Huskies career. His numbers on the wall now, and I think we might be able to see similar things with solo ball. If he, gets his efficiency up, gets his three-point shooting up, and can overall just, run an offense. And I think that will for sure happen. At least he'll make strides this year at running an offense. I don't think he'll be this powerhouse point guard who goes top five overall, but I think he could definitely become an effective point guard.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he showed strides of it last year. When he was starting because of the Castle injury, he showed out. I think the 3-point shot was a little bit of the one thing that he didn't really master per se. He looked pretty good in everything else, but the 3-point shot definitely needed a little bit of work. But yeah, he's gonna have a completely different role. He was behind a bunch of people last year, kind of knew he wasn't really gonna play a ton or as much as he wanted to, but I think this year's a completely different story. He's been working in the gym a bunch, and I really can't wait to see what he does for us this year because I think he's going to be a huge, huge key to this year's team.
Yeah, and unlike a guy like Jaden Ross, who we'll talk about in our next preview, Ball, he played 39 games last year. We're talking like obviously he only averaged 3 points per game. Sure, a bunch of those games of the 39 where he was on the floor for a minute or less than a minute at the end, but he had 18 games where he played double-digit minutes. So this isn't just like a freshman who barely played, but thrown out there as a starter in his sophomore year. He produced last year. We all remember that game against UNC at the Garden. He scored 13 points, hit three threes. Had another game against Xavier, that game where we murdered them at the XL Center, where he's hit four threes off the bench. So he scores in bunches, which is good. That's feel like that's something we need on this team. And I mentioned I had a weird-ish analogy to say, so I guess I'll start with "hear me out," which is probably not. Whenever someone says that, it's probably crazy, but I'm thinking of our 2023 team. We had Sanogo, who was our best player, but we had Hawkins, who was like our best scorer, the guy who was our best shooter, just probably our best pro prospect. I feel like with this year's team, Caravan's our Sanogo. Obviously not positional wise, but just like value to the team wise. Caravan's our Sanogo. I think Ball is our Hawkins. Maybe that's a little bit of a stretch to say, but I just feel like Ball, I feel like is going to be the guy that could lead us in scoring. Like Hawkins, I don't think he quite did. I think Sanogo chipped him by a few points. But I feel like I like that analogy where balls are Hawkins when caravans are Sonogo.
And I honestly feel like Dan Hurley is thinking the same thing. It's pretty apparent that Ball has taken these steps forward. And if he can come forward and can be this 15 to 20 point per game scorer, even 13 plus, he'll be a very effective part of a team that should be going deep in March. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I feel like just the growth that we just saw just in that scrimmage alone against Rhode Island. I mean, I guess we are basing all of this off of that 18-point performance, which probably isn't the wisest thing to do. But I don't see why he can't do that every night. He looked very comfortable producing 18 points for the Huskies. It's just, will he do that for a full season? That remains to be seen, but I feel like the potential is certainly there.
And it is definitely easy to overreact, like you mentioned, but it just was his demeanor and his confidence on the court that really made you think like he is that guy. His confidence was just oozing, and he seemed like he had a different sort of aura to him in a way, and that he was going out there and he knew he was going to be a leading scorer. And I definitely just want to see that continue.
And part of that, I mean, I don't know. I'm not starting rumors here that he was going to transfer or anything, but in this day and age of college basketball, a guy who played 39 games but only averaged 3 points per game, I could easily see him going somewhere, playing the whole time for maybe a smaller Power Five school or a higher mid-major school. But obviously, I'm not saying he was going to do that, but it could have been a possibility. But he stayed through. He played on off the bench his freshman year. He's going to be a starter in his sophomore year, and ideally off to the NBA in a year or two. I don't think I heard that. I don't think I saw that coming before that scrimmage. Once again, is probably overreacting to the game versus URI. But yeah, I didn't think I'd be saying that in this preview probably a few weeks ago.
And in today's day and age in college basketball, I feel like it's very easy to overreact when you have someone like Solo Ball come in who was a four-star prospect. And I feel like as Huskies fans over the past decade or so, we've been used to these guys being big difference makers on our teams. And well, now we're at a point where we don't need them to, and we can allow them to grow. And I feel like we just talked about Noel. I feel like we're gonna see Solo Ball grow a lot this year and maybe even into next year. We don't know, but we don't need Solo Ball. We didn't need Solo Ball to be a difference maker last year. I feel like this year is when, he's gotten a year under his belt and he'll be able to go out there and really show why, he was a four-star recruit and very highly touted after.
I'll just throw my last point out there on Solo Ball. I feel like the writing's on the wall with the sophomore guard breakout. That's something I've talked about. We've talked about a lot on this show. We saw it with Book Night in 21. We saw it with Hawkins when they won the title. And I feel like we're going to see it again with Solo Ball. It's just what Dan Hurley does. He brings in these freshman guards that, I mean, Solo's a little bit of a different scenario because he didn't really play much at all. Hawkins was in the rotation as a freshman. Book Night was a starter by the second half of the year because of injuries to guys like Tyler Polley and Akuka Cook. But I just feel like we're going to see a very similar sophomore leap. I feel like since Ball didn't play as much as a freshman, I don't know if he's quite going to get up to lottery pick level this year like the other two did in their sophomore years, but I feel like he's certainly going to be poised for a breakout season. All right, moving on to the last guard. We got to talk about one of two transfers on this year's roster, Aiden Mahaney. Mahaney in from St. Mary's. I mean, we're just referencing that scrimmage against URI. He came off the bench, scored 17 points, hit three threes. Just instant offense off the bench, something we've seen to have for the past few years.
Yeah, this is the one that I was really excited to talk about because we haven't really talked about him yet. We've talked about Solo Ball for the last year and Diarra for the last 2 years, but this transfer is the one I'm really excited to talk about because I think that you guys said that Solo Ball could be our Hawkins. I think Mahaney could be our Hawkins just because I feel like they play the same way. I mean, Hawkins was very physical, got boards, could shoot the three ball insanely well. And I think Mahaney's like a mirror image of him, honestly. I mean, if you watched him in that game, he got down into the paint to get rebounds. He obviously shot the three ball pretty well. It's 17 points, I believe. So I think he's a mirror image of Jordan Hawkins. And I think that when the time comes that he will end up getting the starting nod eventually, I mean, at least I hope he does because that's basically 3 points every possession if you need it. But I think that he's going to be one of, if not the biggest piece to this year's team. And that might be my hot take. But we've had a big piece to every team. I think Mahaney is kind of the underlooked one because obviously you have Caravan, McNeely, and then now people are starting to realize Solo Ball and in the big. But I think Mahaney can contribute a lot more than a lot of people think.
Mahaney, I feel like I might be overreacting a lot, but to me, he has the potential to be one of the best guards in the whole country under Dan Hurley. You talk about him being like Jordan Hawkins. To me, he is Tristan Newton. He is that Tristan Newton replacement, if you want to even call it that. But just the way that he plays, the way that he moves, he's not an explosive player, but he gets to the basket and he makes the right decisions, just like Tristan Newton did. I feel like with Solo Ball, the Hawkins comparison is there just because if he develops that jump shot and he's as explosive as he is, he's going to be a lottery pick. And I feel like Solo Ball, he has big shoes to fill with Jordan Hawkins, obviously, but I feel like Mahaney doesn't really have shoes to fill. And I feel like that's pretty important in the way that Dan Hurley's going to run the team. I feel like he's going to go out there and he's just going to play his game and he's going to score at will and he's going to make the right play. And I feel like Hurley is going to get into him, California kid, just like Joey, and he's going to morph him into this team player point guard just like Newton was. And he's not going to be the star of the show. Newton played with so many good players, Klingon, Sonogo, Hawkins, the list goes on. But I feel like Aiden Mahaney is just going to be a constant in this starting lineup eventually where you don't even think about it. He might start off slow just like Newton did. They both transferred from smaller conferences, but I feel like Mahaney's going to come in and he's going to make a massive difference. Just his level-headedness and just the way that he will control the offense.
Yeah, I agree. He has the potential to be in that starting lineup. I feel like Ball's a lock in that other position, either Mahaney or Diarra. If Mahaney doesn't crack the starting lineup, he's certainly going to be in the closing lineup. I mean, those are two completely different things. I feel like your closing lineup, it's Mahaney, Ball, McNeely, Caravan, and whichever center is playing better that day. Honestly, Sampson or Terrace Reed. But yeah, just the instant offense that Mahaney provides, especially even if it's off the bench, that's even bigger. It does remind me of a guy like Joey. Obviously, he's more talented than Joey. He can do a lot more things than Joey. Not that Joey's a bad player, friend of the pod, but yeah, I just feel like Mahaney, if he comes off the bench, he could easily average double figures off the bench. Which you don't say that about a lot of people, especially in college basketball.
And if he were to come off the bench, he would kind of be like a hidden gem, I think, because teams usually tend to focus on the starting five more so than the bench, obviously. But I feel like if he were to come off the bench, then he would kind of make teams wonder, like, that's who they have on their bench. Like, how good is this team actually? Like, I think we're going to be very good again this year. But I think what Connor said is right, too, about the closing lineup. The starting lineup obviously matters, but if you need buckets, you need a lot of points in closing the game. Mahaney is going to be in the lineup. Him, McNeely, and Caravan will be in the lineup. They can all shoot the three pretty well. But I think that either way, if he starts or comes off the bench, he's going to be very important to this team.
And if you do look back at the numbers, I'm just going back to that Newton comparison for a minute. Mahaney had a better career at St. Mary's than Newton did at ECU. And I know it's a little different, but Mahaney was a better scorer. He was a more efficient scorer. He was a better three-point shooter. And we saw what Dan Hurley was able to do with Tristan Newton. I feel like we don't take into account enough how much Hurley actually puts into these players to make them better. And I feel like with this system, I feel like we've seen Hassan Diarra kind of cap off, and that's not a bad thing. He's a tremendous defender. He's a Big East six man of the year, and that's outstanding. And you need one of those guys on your team. But I feel like Aiden Mahaney has not reached that ceiling yet, and there is still more to discover from him, and still more to gain from him. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was a 15-point per game scorer this year.
Having not reached that ceiling is exactly where I was going to go to next because I have his stats up for his 2 years at St. Mary's. As a freshman, he was one of the best freshmen in the country. He averaged 13.9 points per game. He shot 40% from three. He was a starter on, it's St. Mary's, it's in the West Coast Conference, but we know St. Mary's is a talented program. We played them in the tournament that year. But yeah, so he averaged 13.9 points per game. Sophomore year, he was on all the breakout lists like before the season, like lists you'd see around now this time last year as the guy is going to take the next step. Maybe he can average 17, 18 points per game. He averaged 13.9 again for the second straight year on worse shooting splits. So, I mean, he wasn't bad by any means, but he didn't take the leap that everyone expected. And feel like he still has that leap in him. Maybe with under Dan Hurley and the coaching staff, he'll take that leap here. It may be harder if he's not playing 33 minutes per game like he did at St. Mary's last year to get up higher than that 14 point per game average. But I could easily, I'd be shocked if he averages less than double figures just with how talented he is scoring the basketball. And it's not just 3 point shooting. I was surprised to see him take it down to the lane a couple of times, score inside. I guess I didn't do my due diligence looking at tape on this guy. I knew he's a guard. They played at St. Mary's, so I didn't expect him to do much more than shoot the three ball, but I was happily surprised to see he can do more, and I honestly should have expected it.
And I'm just putting it out into the universe right now. It'll be very apparent after the preseason games who should be starting at point guard.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if heading into that tough stretch of Baylor, Texas, Gonzaga, and then Big East play right after, if there's some changes if necessary, because the season really starts with that Baylor game. Sure, we have Maui, which is going to be a very tough tournament, but it's basically those little preseason non-conference games against teams you're going to blow out. Then Maui, a couple more of those games, then the show goes on from there. But yeah, you guys got anything else on these guards? It's a very talented group, not the deepest group, but very talented. So yeah, I think that'll do it here for our guard preview. Aiden Mahaney, solo ball, Hassan Diarra, and Ahmad Noel. Up next for us from How About the Huskies, you're going to see a forward slash wing preview. That's going to be the next one we're going to do. Not sure when that'll be out. That'll probably be out either later this week or early next week. So stay tuned for that. And thanks for watching.